Hey there, listeners. Welcome to the latest episode of the podcast of Record. It is Tuesday, May 12th. Thank you for joining us on the continued quarantine editions here of the podcast of Record. We've got a few hard-hitting news stories to discuss with you and then a couple of
I
deep
mean, I wouldn't say
dives.
they're hard hitting. It's like this is investigative journalism. Like we
This is
didn't put a
investigative
hidden camera on
journalism.
someone's glasses and
No,
go
I
like
don't. I,
behind
I
the scenes at the grocery store deli.
I picked news stories than the ones you picked for this weekend, and they all have to do with Dateline investigations.
Yeah. And To Catch a Predator.
Yeah. So apparently, I read recently that the guy from like the Dateline investigations, Chris, whatever his name is, was recently arrested for like assaulting someone, which is just kind of interesting.
See, I mean, he's probably a pretty aggressive guy to begin with, busting
Yeah.
all those pedophiles all the time.
So first up, off the bat, is an interesting coronavirus story here. It was rumored this morning that Amazon is looking at making a purchase of AMC Entertainment, which of course is AMC movie theaters. Interesting acquisition target. Joe, what are your thoughts on that?
Uh, I think the purchase, I mean, and there's also rumors that it's only a rumor, but a purchase like that would make sense for Amazon because remember, Amazon's goal is just to build out its infrastructure, its integration,
Hmm.
and on its media side, it has a film studio, it has a streaming service. It doesn't have a theater like a physical presence, and
Well, yeah, it just
people have
doesn't
talked
have
about
distribution, anything
yeah,
beyond the
and people
streaming.
have talked about Netflix doing this, so it's funny that Amazon may beat them to the punch. But another benefit, and this assumes that theaters are a thing people go back to in the near future, is another interesting piece of Amazon owning a movie theater is Matt, where are movie theaters usually located?
Oh, they're usually near malls in a lot of
Malls,
cases. Yeah.
retail.
Hmm.
And so I think Amazon having a physical presence like a movie theater not only allows them to, sell their own things on the ads they play before the theater, but also could be a pickup and delivery location.
That's interesting.
So it adds an additional physical footprint for
I
them.
mean, I'd argue that they may not have been in consideration to purchase a movie theater chain until, the stock price just bottomed out because
Yeah.
of COVID-19. It's probably not a super interesting acquisition target in, January of this year when it was trading at you know,
Yeah. Record highs, basically.
record highs. Yeah,
Well,
and now
and
it's at 32 cents on the dollar from where it was
and
a couple
consider
months ago.
this for Amazon. In this battle for who's going to control Hollywood, it's it's kind of a foregone conclusion. People think that that's going to be something that belongs to like Netflix and Disney.
Yeah,
But if Amazon manages to buy one of the bigger theater chains, well, now guess who Disney has to do deals with?
sure. I mean,
Disney, because Disney doesn't own theaters. Now, what this made is Disney. It was like a rumor for a long time that Disney was going to start their own chain of theaters. They never got into it. And there's I don't understand the complexity of the law behind movie studios owning their own theaters, but apparently there was a way Disney could, through proxy own their own theater.
yeah, I mean, my guess is there's some antitrust concerns there because a huge generator of stock prices for these studios that are publicly traded um, is reporting your opening weekend numbers. So
Yeah.
if you are self-reporting from the theater you own, that just creates a
Well,
situation that is opportunistic for
there's
fraud.
also like a NEPA. Maybe you know more about this
That's like some
than I
Bobby
do,
Axelrod stuff.
but there's a law that the studios can't own the theaters.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume for
And
that
it's
reason.
old. I think it goes back to the 30s or 40s.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know for sure about the legal side of it. I'm not aware of that. I do know that it's a really complicated process. Distribution is really complex. I do think, I feel like this might still just be a rumor. I mean, I don't know. Movie
Yeah.
theaters, like people aren't going. It's kind of like going to the mall at this point. A lot of people have better systems at home. Their sound is better at home. They're not paying like 10, $15 for popcorn.
Mhm.
Um, and so I feel like people have been going less to the movies, which is why.
So yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the big issue is are they going to be able to work out a deal between the studios and the theaters that had contracts in place for movies versus releasing them early on streaming platforms. So like AMC, I think it was AMC, it may
Yeah,
have been
said they wouldn't carry Universal
Universal's
movies.
films because they pulled Trolls from a theatrical release
Yeah.
and just spent millions of dollars advertising it on streaming on the day it was supposed to go live in theaters. So
So I've seen numbers, Matt, that
as a
suggest the
protest against that.
economics of streaming don't work. That the unit economics of streaming, like in order to make the same money, you would have to double or triple the prices of what it costs
So
to
I
rent something on streaming.
yeah, so well, I mean, I think the way that some of the studios have solved that early on is they are not allowing you to rent it on streaming until it is at the point in the typical life cycle of the film where you would be able to rent it normally. What they've been doing is forcing you to purchase it
Yeah.
for $20 to $30 for films that are
Okay,
still
interesting.
in their window of what would be their theatrical release.
Mhm.
There was a movie, The Invisible Man, um, which is the 12th time or whatever that we've reinterpreted that classic story, but this one actually got super high ratings, was like 91 or 92 Rotten Tomatoes, but basically it was $29.99 to buy, which is in comparison to anything else on the Apple movie store an outrageous price. But when you factor it against what would have been 2 theatrical tickets, because it's
Yeah.
in its period of theatrical release right now, it's about what you would pay. And the popcorn's a hell of a lot cheaper at my house than it is at AMC.
Yeah.
But that's so World Tour, World Tour was $20 to rent for
Mhm.
2
Oh,
days.
okay, okay. So they just
So
jacked the
they
price up to
did,
rent. Okay.
and rent it for 2 days, and I was thinking about, we've been talking about this too. I think, and I paid it, we watched it, and it was great.
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of people who are like, "Oh, well, I'm paying $20, I want the ambiance of the theater." But
And that's fair.
and that is fair, and right now we don't have that option. So,
Right.
I don't know how well that would continue to do. I think it would have to be both theatrical release and streaming. They would have to
Yeah.
both be an option. It can't just be one. And the other thought I had was that, you know, movie theaters are just, I mean, I don't know. I think they're not gonna hold up. People aren't. It's gonna be a long time before people want to go back.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It is, just next to, like cruise ships, in my opinion. Like this,
the
crammed little room
yeah,
that they're
the
constantly moving people in and out of.
Academy also changed their rules for this year, where
Mm.
you can be nominated for Best Picture even if you haven't had a
Oh, that's
theatrical
right.
release. And so
Yeah,
for a
that's
long
right.
time, that's been the rule, that you have to have a theatrical release to be able to be qualified for Best
That's the
Picture.
main thing that's always prevented me from getting my Oscar.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
So
I think we've go ahead.
they changed it for the year. I don't know if that's going to become permanent.
Right.
And I think that will change the landscape for theatrical releases too. There's a lot of movies that don't really need to be released theatrically.
Yep.
Yeah. 'Cause
As far as I know, none of the major streaming platforms have done a theatrical release of any of their original content, right? Now, I mean, occasionally you see like Netflix puts out DVDs of its shows, which
no, that Netflix did what was the one with Robert De Niro, the gangster one that came out, The Irishman. They released that in theaters.
there was a theatrical release of that. Okay, I didn't
Yeah.
know that.
All 7 hours of it. So, and we can move on from this topic. But another thing I was going to say about this is there's a take on the pandemic has basically not so much changing what's going on, but just accelerating things that were already changing. So theaters were probably already going to be in trouble because the model of theatrical release stopped making sense maybe 8 or 9 years ago, given the
Mhm.
quality of TVs in people's houses and the ability to stream high definition. And so I think that's a theme we're going to see a lot in the coming months. But next story, Matt, we got a Facebook bit.
So just to go, the Irishman, it looks like, was in an extremely limited
Yeah,
theatrical
it was like
release
one showing.
solely for the purpose of
Yep.
Martin Scorsese being eligible for an Oscar. That was the only reason they did it.
Yeah.
The next story is, and that was out of Bloomberg, by the way. I mean, the Amazon story is kind of all over financial news today, but we were
Amazon will
specifically
buy
talking about
something
the
before this
story.
is over. Look
Yeah.
for Amazon to pick up a new business line before all this is done.
Um, So Facebook, next story is about Facebook. Facebook led the creation of a nonprofit political advocacy group that aims to repair the tech industry's battered image among politicians. I mean, this is probably a good idea because
American Edge. That's
yeah,
the name of it.
that's a good name.
I mean, Matt, this goes to a conversation we had. I don't know, because I almost had like written an op-ed about it maybe 4 or 5 months ago. But basically, the problem with big tech that they were having is they weren't acting like they had the prefix big in front of their name. You know, big oil, big tobacco, big finance, big whatever. When your business reaches your industry reaches that stage, you have to behave differently as a company in order to survive.
Well, they were
You
more interested in having the conversation about, whether or not they should be considered big, right? They would rather fight that fight than they would
Yeah,
like
then just
fight the
act like
actual
it.
issues that they have. Yeah.
And when you act like it, what you do is instead of assuming that just giving an explanation for your behavior, whether you have nothing to be, you've done nothing illegal or not, what you begin to do is you start to set up defensive ramparts around that business. And so you start funding nonprofits and you start funding political committees who are advancing your interest in the culture at large. And almost every company you associate our industry with big has this. So it's lobbyists, it's political consultants, it's
Well, look,
PR, it's third
Exxon is
parties.
not spending time trying to shed the title of big oil, right?
Correct.
They
They're
they
spending
know
time
that's a
now
losing
trying to
battle.
sell oil,
Yeah, well,
which
that
has
too.
become difficult. um, so I think this is smart on. I think it's 3 years too late. Like I saw that this was going to have to happen as soon as they started getting called in for those congressional testimonies. And look, we work in the advocacy sector, part of our business in that sector, and so a lot of the companies with big in front of their name, we do work on behalf of, and this type of work is, I mean, it is the staple thing that political consultants and PR people and DC and state capitals do for the most part. And tech has been strangely absent for its history. For as big a sector as tech is, they've had a remarkably small presence. Even when you see reports will come out about, big tech spent, X million dollars in lobbying this year, or like their quarterly lobbying expenses are sometimes only a few $1,000,000,
Yeah.
which is nothing in the world of federal lobbying. Like they
Well,
may as well have spent $0.
and historically, a lot of them have been very resistant to doing some of the other standard things that go into dealing with politics and public policy, right? So they've been willing to spend on lobbyists, but have been unwilling to do something like create an advocacy group
Yeah.
like they just did, or make political contributions, do any of the things to get involved in the political process that most large companies have done at that
And
point.
look, I think this is natural. Part of the way our country works is our country is able to permit businesses to get to very large scale and act fairly autonomously with minimum regulation compared to other countries. And the way in our system it's happened that we bring them to heel is we put a lot of political conflict in front of them, has a check on what they can and can't do, and those businesses then have to respond to that political conflict by starting to build the apparatus to engage in that world.
Sure.
What do we got next? I think we had a story. It's a clip I tied in there about job cuts in April.
Well, what I've got up next is U.S. average time spent per device.
So if you look above that, I think there's just the text I put in. Everybody's listening. Like, what are they talking about? We do our news rundown in a Slack channel. I just kind of copy and paste the stories in, and usually there's a link. So I'll read it because it's in
Go for
front
it.
of me, Matt. The advertising, public relations, and other related industries cut 36,400 jobs in April, down 7.5%, according to monthly unemployment report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Agencies have historically made significant staff reductions during recession, and these jobs typically don't recover as soon as the economy does, according to analysis of 30 years of statistics, and that is out of Ad Age. So, Matt, I want to get your thoughts on that, on the business model of agencies, and why isn't agencies are the first to cut and the last to rehire?
I mean, I think one of the big reasons there is that because they're so dependent on what their clients are doing. So, I mean, they're waiting on clients to recover to ramp up their budgets. And then, that agency is going to spend weeks, perhaps months trying to recover the lost profits from the period um, immediately beforehand. There's also and it's getting larger. There's also a much larger payment windows for ad agencies
Yeah,
than
that's
there
what I was
was
gonna
10
say.
years
It's the
ago.
cash flow game they're in
Yeah, so
too.
they're
Causes
they're
them to
looking
make
at
those
60,
cuts
90,
earlier.
or 120 days of net that they're waiting for invoices to get paid, and that's causing a lot of problems. It's probably causing some of them to lay people off before they really have to, because they're worried about that cash drying up and then it taking another 4 months to start getting any significant cash back in the door.
Yeah, even if they're IOUs. It's funny when we first started our business, a mentor of mine, told me business is like a three-legged stool. First you have to get the work, then you have to do the work, and then you have to get paid for the work. And I was like, man, those first two legs, that's the whole game. Like getting paid for the work is like sending the invoice weight on the check.
Yeah.
Except when you start to get work and do work, like agencies maybe next to I don't know, construction companies perhaps, or some of the most cash flow challenged businesses that I've seen, because oftentimes those ad floats extend to the millions of dollars, and the larger clients, especially the publicly traded ones, want to keep cash on their books through the next quarter. And so they're always playing a game of how late can they pay, even if they plan on paying.
Yep.
And in agency world, which is a little different from say like retail, where you might have to keep an inventory on hand, is credit is pretty hard to come by for an agency, for an ad spend. Like banks don't usually want to lend somebody, $15 million to do a network TV buy and get paid back 6 months later.
Well, I mean, yeah, the other problem is, like, if you're the agency and you're in a position where you have to go take out a loan or a line of credit in order to make a major ad buy like that, because you don't have a client that's willing to prepay or pay it up front directly to the network. The problem is, like, your margin is already very small on that amount of money anyways. You're probably taking a single digit percentage commission, so you really can't afford to be paying, single digit interest rates on that cash over 6 months, right? You can't afford to take a 2% interest loan over 6 months when you're making 5% on the entire ad buy.
Yeah. So next story is the time on device
Time on device.
going
This is
up.
out of eMarketer, which is a great platform that we use for research, for proposals, lots of stuff we do. Has some eMarketer research in there. We'd love for them to be a sponsor. They're not a sponsor, but we do think they have a good service, so we give them some free credit anyway. So this is average time spent per day with social networks, not on device, with social networks. It's gone up in 2020, not so shockingly. It is expected to go down actually in 2021 and 2022
Yeah,
from
the
where it is right now.
11% hike is pretty big. That's like
Yeah.
an additional 8 or 9 minutes a day.
Yep. We're also, we're seeing a concentration of new networks in the last couple of years that are, slowly
Yeah, well, even Facebook was up for
growing.
the first time in a while in the
Yep.
United States. Its average daily use was up, I think, to 20 minutes or something.
Was
Is what I
this
saw.
just for the month of April?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that makes sense, right? You've got people with a lot more time on
That's why
their
the tech
hands.
companies are invested in keeping us in our house. Pandemic 2020.
Okay.
I almost had a story on that on conspiracy theory searches.
Yeah, that man, the pandemic folks are
But
they're
it
active.
seems to be something that's already being talked about widely in the
Yeah,
the
but they're active, and some people that are not normally the conspiracy theory folks in my feed have become the pandemic folks in my feed. So that's been relatively surprising, actually.
Pandemic 2020.
Yeah,
Get your pills and play on your phone.
don't inhale the chemtrails. That's all I have to tell you. Don't inhale them.
So for our deep dives today, I picked two stories that I think are of interest. The first is out of Politico. It's an opinion piece entitled "Why It Doesn't Matter That Trump is Beating Biden Online." And Matt, I'm going to assume you haven't read it. It's a little bit wordy, but it effectively makes the argument that Biden doesn't need to have a sophisticated social platform because Biden's message is more resonant with the country. The country is largely tired of having a quote tweeter in chief, end quote. And Biden can use surrogates to fill that void in the online space on his behalf.
I mean, I
And
gotta.
meanwhile, let's contrast this. The thing this is written against is Brad Parscale, Trump's campaign manager, who was previously the digital director, who was previously a website builder in Texas. Uh, One of the most interesting stories in marketing, I think, is probably Brad Parscale last 4 years, but that's a different subject. Says they're about to turn on the quote Death Star. That's what he says about the Trump digital
Love it.
apparatus.
I
So
mean, given Joe Biden's propensity for gaffes when he opens his mouth or becomes more open in the media, I would have to agree with this strategy. I do not think he needs to become more accessible than he is right now. I think he needs to become less accessible, um, because what he's trying to build his brand around is that he's the exact opposite of Trump, right? Like
yeah, he's
Trump,
the analog candidate in the digital age, is what they
yes.
use in the article.
Yeah. And so, I mean, Trump has built his brand on being, more or less directly available to his army, to his followers by, he's tweeting, he's typing these tweets out. They get direct information from him. They like the fact that it's unfiltered, regardless of whether or not you think it's a good thing. That is something that his supporters like.
Well, there's a cycle there, Matt, that
Yeah.
you have to explain a little bit if people aren't, in the political arm of marketing. The cycle is this, that they're taking advantage. This is the flywheel of the Trump campaign. Trump tweets, Trump gets in the news. Supporters see the tweets, see it in the news, respond to the conflict. The campaign then targets the supporters with advertisements for sign the Trump birthday card or buy this mug or get this new hat. I saw the MAGA mama hat is what they were pitching for Mother's Day.
Ah.
For that special lady in your life. Uh, those supporters buy that, and they're doing two things when they buy it. One is it's a campaign contribution. Two is they're providing their contact information, text message back to the campaign. So it's this virtual targeting cycle that the campaign has, where Donald Trump, every time he tweets or speaks, is spinning the flywheel.
I think that's right. Joe Biden is doing something a little different every time he speaks.
So is it, so I want you to take on and I'll make the best case I think they make in this article. It's something I got completely wrong. And it was this: Michael Bloomberg. Michael Bloomberg legitimately had the best back end campaign operation I've seen in terms of the digital they were running, the targeting, the amount of money they were not targeting. They didn't really target, they just spent money. But the variety of content they were doing, it was extremely well executed. It turned out the candidate just being awful offset all of that, and Bloomberg collapsed. So the article this makes is, look, if that was important, Bloomberg would be the nominee, not Biden. So that digital stuff maybe matters a little, doesn't matter a lot. Just matters that it's the right candidate with the right message.
Yeah, I mean, I think it matters a whole hell of a lot if the Democratic primary wasn't a race for how anti-Trump you are, right? I mean, and that's what it turned out to be, is who do the voters end up trusting the most to not be Trump and to beat Trump in November. And if it had been a different race, if Donald Trump hadn't won, or if a more moderate or typical Republican candidate had won the presidency in 2016, I don't think that's what the Democratic race would have looked like, and I probably don't think that Joe Biden would be the nominee in that situation. But I mean, again, I think that because in comparison, everything looks more boring, everything looks more stable than Donald Trump. What you're actually racing to is to have the appearance of being the most boring and being the most stable,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why you've seen with, I mean, some of the issues that the Biden campaign has been dealing
Yeah.
with some of these accusations, is they've still rushed to try to just be the most boring, stable, grandfatherly candidate out there.
Yeah. So the good thing is we'll know in a few months if the strategy works, or we'll all be dead from the pandemic.
Oh God.
when
the
when we
piece,
don't
by the
take Bill
way,
Gates' nanobots.
yeah, when you don't get your RFID chip. That
Yeah.
piece, by the way, was out of Politico. It's called "Why It Doesn't Matter That Trump is Beating Biden Online." It's an opinion piece
So
out of Political.
last piece for today, deep dive, and this one is out of Adweek, and it's It's about a 3D printer printing a mask, but to me, that's not the story. It's the second part. It's 3D printer sees high demand for branded face mask. And I've seen these in some stores. So Publix, a grocery store in Florida in the Southeast, has them. A couple of chain restaurants I've gotten takeout have them going. So what I want to get is opinions on mask has branded product.
I just think this is going to be too temporary of a, I don't really want to call it a fad because I feel like that's kind of minimizing it, but I think this is going to be too temporary of a situation where that many people are wearing masks for, branded masks to catch on. Now, what I do think is really interesting on the 3D printed side and not the branded side is that some companies have been able to use scanners and 3D printers to essentially make custom face masks for hospital personnel, which are really important because making sure that fit is perfectly sealed is a big part of the
Hmm.
efficacy of those masks for healthcare workers. On the branded side, um, I think there was probably a rush to make masks because we had a shortage even of the fabric mask, right? You couldn't order disposable masks from anywhere. Amazon, other retailers were prioritizing them only for healthcare organizations or government
Hmm.
organizations. Um, so, I mean, there were a lot of little pop-up shops around town that just started taking pieces of fabric and making masks, and some of them were donating them, some of them were selling them online. We ordered some here locally in Tallahassee from someone that was just making them from fabric they bought at Joann Fabric Store. So I think brands like couldn't resist the urge to get into that, and I don't think it was nefarious. I think they saw an opportunity to sell something at a reasonable price that had their logo on it. But I think the problem was um, that instinct came from a situation where there just simply weren't enough masks. I think as that has calmed down, people have been able to get them. People are also starting to stop using them. If you go to Home Depot today versus going to Home Depot 2 weeks ago, it's a completely different landscape inside. There's, a couple weeks ago, you were only in Home Depot if you had a mask and you might have been wearing gloves. Today, maybe a third of the people in the store are wearing masks.
So, what do you think about them as a? Here's my concern about them being branded, not necessarily worn, right? Like one of the things that it may be smart that food service workers in the kitchens, wear mask,
Right.
right? Because maybe some of the mask, isn't a bad idea and may have a more permanent like fixture in the way we do things, but has a restaurant or a grocery store say the mask is it reminds you of not wellness but illness for the
Yeah.
most part, and I'm not sure I want my food brand like associated that strongly
Yeah.
with illness.
Yep.
And it's not that I don't want my employees to wear something that is maybe the proper color and certainly the proper fit if we're going to require that in the store, because I don't want everybody wearing a different thing. I want it to match the uniform. I'm not sure I want to stick my logo on it though.
I
Yeah.
don't
I mean,
know.
and that's
I think the climate's changing a little bit on that too, though. I think that, yes, if you go to Home Depot today, people aren't wearing masks. I think depending on what happens, there's a resurgence of COVID cases being predicted because of that very behavior. If there's a resurgence, I think that more people are going to want to wear masks more regularly, and it's going to become more of a fashion staple and less illness related.
So when will you know that that line has been crossed? Because brands spend a lot of time concerned about brand safety, right? It's one of the ways that they ended up killing local media in the last 2 months. Um, so when do you know that these brands that didn't want their ads next to stories about COVID? When is it safe for them to put their brands on probably what will go down as the iconic um, picture of COVID, which is the face mask?
I mean, I think it really depends on how client facing the the company is. Like with Publix, you are dealing with food and with people all the time, and
Yeah.
seeing someone with a mask, a Publix mask, is very reassuring and very
Mhm.
identifiable that this person is working here and they're actually caring about how they're treating their consumers. So I think it really depends on the company and how client facing they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess my point was more along the lines of like I just don't know that there's going to be a high demand for branded masks outside of like companies forcing their employees to wear them. And I mean that's fine, right? The Publix can force its employees to wear the Publix branded masks. I don't think anyone was, was concerned with whether the masks were branded or not. Like they've got a Publix logo on their shirt and whatnot. I just don't know that there's going to be a huge amount of customer interest in the branded mask versus just, hey, I was able to get a mask from this store and I was happy I was able to purchase one, versus like, oh, I got this bright green Publix mask, or I got
I got
Walmart,
that Nike mask.
yeah,
I got
Walmart's
that Air
probably not
Jordan
slapping its
mask.
brand on any masks. But yeah, I mean, you could have some really iconic brands that if they stepped in would be of interest to some people. Nike's probably one of the few brands that could do it.
Yeah, then you have like a workout mask and it's just got holes in it, so it breathes easier.
Yeah, they probably have like breathable masks, because that's what I like. Honestly, I wear a mask and I can't breathe.
My biggest problem is it fogging up my glasses.
Well, my biggest problem is, especially in like grocery stores or restaurants, is it mumbles people's voices and it's difficult to hear what they're saying.
Probably some of the only other like major brands that could get away with like actually selling it are like luxury brands, right? So if you got the Gucci face mask, my guess is that would sell pretty well.
Yeah. Everybody walks around looking like, pirates or ninjas or criminals. It's amazing.
You want to walk out to your private jet while you're exposed to, the people that are
you don't want to breathe that
loading your
peasant air
luggage.
if you're walking to your private jet.
They're fueling your jet, your luggage, whatever. You want to make sure that until you breathe that clean Gulfstream recycled air on your jet, that you've got a nice Gucci mask on.
I just got us dinged because I didn't. This is on me. This is like one of the banes of Zoom calls right now, is the notifications on a Mac, the little dings from text.
Well, I have headphones on, so
yeah.
I solved that problem. Yeah.
All right, Nipa, I think we are out of time, correct?
Yes, we are.
We've come to the end of another fine and great episode.
We have come to the end. With that, we hope you tune in next week for the latest marketing advertising news, as well as
or not. Do what makes you happy.
Yeah, or not. Do what makes you happy. But even if you're not going to come back next week, do drop in your favorite podcast app of choice and give us a rating or review. That helps more people discover the show. We'll be back next week. Stay safe. Take care.